Lawson, what an incredible hour and a half it's been. Where to begin? What are your thoughts?
We certainly expected that the former president would want to make an opening statement of sorts. And what he's done in this hour and a half that he's spoken for is really to try and paint himself as a victim, as being targeted, an individual being targeted, whereas nobody else is being targeted. And, as I say, to play the victim and to use that as the backdrop to the evidence that the evidence that he will have to give later when the questioning from the evidence team begins.
Yeah. I mean, he goes as far back as the 90s, describing these 3 intelligence reports that he, in fact, saw, these reports that were at the heart of it, trying to get rid of him, trying to get him off the political scene. But perhaps let's bring it closer to present day and talk about the Public Protector's report that eventually led to the establishment of the state capture inquiry. What's he said specifically about this perceived agenda, perceived by him, that Thuli Madonsela, together with other government institutions and organizations, have had against him?
Well, yes, I mean, he's painted a background to that report, the fact that Advocate Madonsela at the time had sought additional funding from Treasury to conduct the investigation because it was such a wide-ranging investigation. We will recall that she asked Treasury at the time for 3 million rands. I think in the end she was given 1.5 million rands. She completed the report and submitted it. And the remedial action in that report was, amongst others, that a commission of inquiry, such as the Zondo Commission, should be established, but that the person to head that inquiry should not be selected by the President, as is ordinarily the case, but by the Chief Justice. And that was done on the basis that the President, being implicated in allegations of state capture, is conflicted from making that appointment. This matter was argued in the High Court when the President took the state of capture report on review, and the argument was rejected by the court because the court found that he was indeed in a conflictual situation and therefore upheld the recommendation that the Chief Justice should make that selection, which ultimately Mr. Zuma, when he was still President, abided by and established this Commission of Inquiry.
Yeah, he talks quite extensively in the past 90 minutes or so about Thuli Madonsela, not only the issue around the establishment of the state capture inquiry itself, but going a bit further back and those investigations into the upgrades at Nkandla. Now, he says there were a number of investigations done, nothing untoward was found, but Thuli Madonsela, according to Zuma, was hell-bent on finding something against him.
Well, again, this matter was ventilated before the courts, and it took a constitutional court judgment that directed that the President must repay a reasonable portion of the upgrades at Nkandla that were for his personal benefit and had nothing to do with security upgrades. And he's tried to, again, conflate issues with other former presidents who've had similar security renovations to their private homes after they've left office, but those were limited to security arrangements. And we know, as a result of the whole Nkandla issue, that over 250 million rands of public money was spent, and the President was ordered to pay back a very small portion of that. I think it was, if I recall correctly, it was 7.8 million rands that the former President was required to pay back for things such as the amphitheatre, the infamous fire pool, the chicken run, and so on. So, which were non-security issues. And again, Mr. Zuma is trying to distort facts to try and portray this alleged conspiracy against him, which he is arguing dates back to 1990 with 3 unnamed intelligence reports seeking to have him removed from office.
Lawson, we're talking about the facts of his testimony so far, but what's your take, having watched the former president in various situations in court over the past 20 years, most recently as well, back in court in KZN? Just what's your sense of how of his demeanor, of the tone that he's taking here today? I think he had a bit of a slow start. He told the Commission that he is suffering from flu. But towards the end there, certainly before we took the tea break, he'd really gotten into his stride and was speaking with some feeling.
Indeed, he's obviously, prepared very well for this, and knows the story that he wants to tell. And as I say, he's certainly his demeanour and the content of what he said is very consistent with his approach over the years. In terms of trying to portray himself as a victim, somebody who's being singled out, that there's a conspiracy against him, and that we're all against him. But that, the fundamental issue here is that there are very serious allegations against Mr. Zuma, and this is the opportunity for him to answer questions that relate to those allegations. We know, for example, that Advocate Madonsela, when she was conducting the state of capture inquiry, interviewed Mr. Zuma, but he refused to respond to many of the questions that she put to him. And this is an opportunity now for him to answer those questions, and I'm sure many others that Advocate Paul Pretorius, as the evidence team leader, will be putting to him once his opening statement has been completed.
Lawson, before we let you go, I suppose we're going to get to the nub of the issues when Advocate Paul Pretorius does get to question him around specific allegations that have been made against him at the state capture inquiry. If we think back to just a number of his accusers, shall we say, Pravin Gordhan, Barbara Hogan, and Nhlanhla. If we look, for example, at Themba Maseko's testimony, that Zuma instructed him, that was what he testified to last year, Zuma instructed him back in 2010 to help the Guptas, so to speak. And what he wanted, in effect, was to direct that entire GCIS budget of 600 million rand to Gupta-owned media companies, Lawson, if you just cast your mind back to his testimony. And I suppose the questions will come when perhaps Advocate Paul Pretorius might ask, did you make that instruction? Why then was Themba Maseko fired from that post after he refused to direct that 600 million rand to Gupta-owned companies? And why then after that did the amount of investment into Gupta-owned companies from GCIS triple? So those are the kinds of specific questions that Advocate Paul Pretorius will put to the President, no doubt.
Certainly, I think those are amongst the questions that we'll put, and I think it was disingenuous of the President's legal team earlier this morning to try to say that he should have been afforded the list of questions that they were going to ask him. I think the whole of the Zondo Commission has been conducted in public. Transcripts of the evidence of previous witnesses are freely available, and his legal team could easily have gone through those transcripts and seen where Mr. Zuma has been implicated and what questions would arise for him as a result of that previous testimony, and been able to prepare him adequately. And I'm sure they have done so. But I think that was part of the setup this morning to try to suggest that the Commission is treating him unfairly. I think he's been treated with kid gloves so far. Very few other witnesses have had the opportunity to make such an extended opening statement without being questioned.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks as always, Lawson Naidoo, for taking the time to talk to us. Lawson Naidoo from the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution.